Good evening. Ron Mata here, welcoming you to another one of our wonderful Activate Worcester shows. This one will be a little bit different than some you've seen recently. This is being filmed, what is today's date? Today's the 17th, isn't it?
Yeah.
As you know, this area was hit with a terrible tragedy at the marathon last Monday. So this is kind of a little somber backlight to the entire proceedings today. But it's really kind of an interesting segue to the guest that we have. And he's got an awful lot to say. And I think you're going to like what you'll hear. And without further ado, Sandy, why don't you introduce our guest, sir?
Well, thank you. I guess unless folks have been living under a rock for the last month or 6 weeks, they probably will recognize our guest this evening. He's a first-generation American, Naval Academy grad, also a Navy pilot. I never did figure out that landing something on a boat trick. And then from a pilot, a SEAL, quite an unusual career path in the military. And since then, he's left the military and done quite well in business. And beyond that, I believe an MBA from Harvard, which of course set him up for the work that he does in the business community. Married, 4 children, and a candidate for the U.S. Senate seat that's open, and he'll be running in the primary on the 30th of this month. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Gabriel Gomez. And Gabriel, maybe you can tell us how it is you decided to run for the Senate.
I appreciate it. Me llamo Gabriel Gómez. No soy un político. Y soy corriendo para senador de los Estados Unidos. For a lot of people who don't speak Spanish, my name is Gabriel Gómez. I'm not a career politician, and I'm running for the United States Senate. I'm a first-generation American. My parents came here from Colombia a year before I was born. And when I was born, my mom didn't know English, so I learned Spanish first. And from a young age, I saw how this country embraced my parents and welcomed them and gave them a chance at the American dream, not just for themselves, but for their kids. And I wanted to give back. So I applied to the Naval Academy. I graduated from the Naval Academy, went to flight school first, got winged, became a pilot, and was flying on-off aircraft carriers for a few years. And then I didn't want to look back on anything and have any regrets, and I wanted to try a bigger challenge. I wanted to be a SEAL. My commanding officer and all my friends were telling me that you've got less than 1 in 5 chance of making it through if you start. And the Navy was quick to tell me that if I didn't make it through, I was going to lose my pilot status and I wouldn't be able to go back and fly.
Really?
Yes. And I did it anyways. I was class leader of SEAL Training Class 181. Had a great time in the Navy, had a phenomenal time in the SEAL teams. But the highlight of my time in the SEAL teams was on my first SEAL detachment when I met my beautiful wife, Sarah. She was a Peace Corps volunteer, and she was a teacher at a school for children with special needs in the West Indies. Now, Sarah and I have been married for 17 years. We have 4 amazing kids, 13, 11, 10, and 8. And we have 2 labs, and we live down in Cohasset. And I did my 9 years in the Navy. I got out, went to Harvard Business School, and I've been in the private sector for 16 years, helping companies grow and be successful. And so people always ask, why are you running? It's pretty simple. I started my career serving in the military, and I've spent 16 years in the private sector, and I've got 4 young kids that I'm really concerned that they're not going to have a chance at the same American dream of their American dream, and everybody else who's watching their kids, that they may not have the same chance that I had when I was young. And the reason my parents came here was for their kids to have a chance at the American dream. Because I think if you continue down the path we're at right now, which is almost $17 trillion in debt, the fiscal instability, the companies have so much uncertainty where they're not invested in themselves, their people, and more importantly, they're not hiring. I'm just concerned that my kids won't have that same chance. I've been fortunate. I've done well. I've earned everything I've done in my life, from going to the academy, to earning my wings, to earning my SEAL Trident, to going to Harvard Business School. I've earned everything, earned my private sector career success. And I just want to make sure that my kids and everybody else's kids have the same chance to at least try to have their American dream. And that's why I'm running. So I'd rather go down there, be part of the solution, than remain on the sidelines and complain.
One of the things that people may say is, well, that's all fine and dandy, and you've got a stellar academic career, a stellar military career, and from a business perspective, you've done very, very well for yourself. However, the one glitch here is there's really no elective background here, okay? Why should we give an individual like this a shot at the Senate seat when you haven't been a school committee person, and on and on and on?
I wear with a badge of honor that I've never been in politics before. And I'm running against two fine men, but they've collectively been in politics for almost 40 years. Mr. Sullivan was first elected as a state rep in 1990, and he's been in politics since then. Mr. Winslow, a fine man, but his calling card when we're campaigning, side by side, is that he's served at every level of the State House, since the 1990s. And I think, what we have down in D.C. is you have, career politicians, people that have been in politics for a good part of their career, and you see what happens when you get that. You've got dysfunction, you've got gridlock, you've got failure. I honestly think that people get in politics for the right reason, but I think the longer you're in politics, the more that you lose focus of why you entered politics in the first place. And I think what we need to do is we need to get back to the citizen servants model. I put out a 7-point plan to reboot Congress, and point number 2 on that was term limits. The president's term limited. I think congressmen and senators should be term limited. I think that we need to get back to where you go down there, you do your duty, you leave your post better than when you arrived, and you come back. And I think you have to come back. You should live under the laws that you passed. I think you should live among the people that you served. And more importantly, I think you should try to get a job with one of the companies whose lives you impacted. I think we need to get back to that model.
Reap what you sow.
Exactly. So that's how we started this country. It was great at the beginning, and I think we've lost focus. And now you have people down there. I mean, for instance, Congressman Markey has been in Congress for 37 years. When he first got elected in 1976, I was playing Little League Baseball, and he also said that he was going to self-impose term limits for 2 terms. Well, we saw where that happened, and we saw where we are there.
How's that working out?
How's that working out? So,
What they typically do, and there's several of them in Massachusetts, they have that same mantra. Oh, term limits, term limits. Then when they get in, they realize all that I've learned in the last term or 2 terms, we can't let that go by the boards. Now I can really be productive for my constituents. And the old idea of cutting that term limitation back goes bye-bye. The other thing that you mentioned, which scares me, is, the president has term limits. There's some folks out of New York that keep beating the drum on this one, that they should rescind that and let that be open-ended. Wouldn't that be a jolly experience to go through? Bad enough, but anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Term limits are an important point. What are some of the other key points in your 7-point plan?
the other parts of the 7-point plan is, I think that if you're either a congressman or a senator, you shouldn't be able to be a lobbyist. I think you need to pick early on whether you want to be a public servant or you want to be a lobbyist. I think what happens is you have too many congressmen and senators who later on in another career become lobbyists, and they just exacerbate the problem of career politicians. I think you should have a balanced budget amendment. I think that the president, whether he or she is a Republican or Democrat, should have a line item veto. I think this would get rid of a lot of the pork and would help actually balance the budget. I think that if Congress doesn't pass a budget, then they shouldn't get paid until they pass a budget. Now, we did see the Senate finally pass a budget for the first time in 4 years, and A, it never balances. I'm not sure why we waited 4 years for this. And B, it raises taxes by $1 trillion. I also think that getting back to the citizen servant, I think that your pay as a congressman or a senator should be the same on day one as it is the last day. You're going to be term limited. You're not going down to D.C. to profit. And you're going down there to serve the people and to come back. And I think the other one is we should have to put our assets in a blind trust. We have a lot of access to hearings and briefings where we get a lot of private information, privileged information. I think you just need to take the fog out and the potential malfeasance out of the way and just put our assets in a blind trust until we leave. I think those 7 points, and the fact with those 7 points is they're very popular everywhere, including here in Massachusetts, except area codes 202. You get down to D.C., and what happens is the economy is actually doing really well down there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Doing
Booming.
extremely well. And so what happens is you get down there, people get down there, they forget to come back to where they came from, and they're in a blind bubble. They're in a bubble where, oh my gosh, the economy's doing great down here. Lobbyists are booming. The number of lobbyists has increased by thousands every year, the last 15 years. DC economy is booming, and they just don't realize that the economy around the rest of the country, and here in Massachusetts, things are not nearly as well, not as good as they are down in DC.
Well, the actual number of people employed as a percentage of the available workforce is at a 30-year low,
Right, and
irrespective of this nonsense on the unemployment rate.
Right, and you saw the last jobs report number come out where we added 88,000 jobs, which was less than half of what was expected. Now, we raised taxes at the end of the year last year, not only the top 2%, but we raised it on everybody with the payroll tax. And you see the effect because if you see the retail sales that came out in that jobs report, retail sales have fallen off the cliff. People don't have as much disposable income. They're not going to the diners, as often per week. They're not going to Walmart. They're not going to Sears and JCPenney. They're not going to the BJ stores. They're just not spending as much because they don't have as much to take home. And that incremental for the middle 90% of this country is significant. And that's why you see this effect, and that's why you see companies that are just not hiring. They got too much uncertainty, and you get a report like this jobs report, which is very anemic, and it's just not good.
Well, having Obamacare to deal with next year is having a big impact on it as well. You mentioned the 88,000 that they trumpet. I'd like to see where are these jobs actually materializing. That's another story. But another number that came out literally at the same time is that there were 81,000 people
SSDI.
who suddenly explain the point.
Well, yeah, the Social Security disability has been for the last several years now increasing at about 1 million a year. So 1 million people a year are being moved out of the unemployment rolls by going on disability. After 2 years on disability, you also get to be on Medicare.
Right.
That section of the SSDI portion of Social Security and Medicare will be the first thing to be bankrupt within a couple of years. And once people go on, they never leave.
They're there. That's their
There's
job.
not much of an incentive to go off, unfortunately.
No.
And we need to, we have a spending problem. When you saw the president propose a budget that
This was the highest of
and
all the proposals, right?
And unfortunately, there was one part that I was heartened that he finally raised entitlements to at least a national discourse. But still, his budget never balances, and it still raises taxes by over $1 trillion. And now I think and it also it just ignored the core problem that we have a spending problem. It's like diagnosing a patient and not acknowledging that the cancer is right here, and you're trying to treat something else by ignoring where the cancer is, and you need to treat the cancer. Our cancer is a spending problem, and you need to address entitlements. And I put out a plan from day one where the people that are receiving retirement benefits on Social Security and Medicare, or those that are approaching retirement age, will have zero effect on any plan that I put forward. I think that there should be some kind of means testing on people of my generation and my kids' generation. I think there should be kind of means testing. I would argue that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, don't need all the benefits of a Medicare. I also think that there could be a gradual increase.
How about Joe Biden? I understand he made a few bucks on
I think quite a
Social
few people
Security.
could probably get away with not having to have their full Medicare benefits. I also think that you can have a gradual increase in the retirement age for people of my generation and the younger generation. You can increase the retirement age by 1 month per year for 24 years, and over a 24-year period, that's a long time, you'd increase it by just 2 years. And this change CPI that the president has proposed on his budget is also a way to address the spending problem. We need to acknowledge first that we have a spending problem, and that's how we're going to actually start signaling to the business community that we're getting serious about this debt problem, we're getting serious about our spending, and it starts getting rid of some of the uncertainty that they have. Because right now, there's so much uncertainty out there, that's why they're not hiring, and that's why they're holding back their investment.
So what about regulations? I just saw something today where it looks like Congress, heaven forbid, is actually going to do something about the ethanol nonsense.
Right. We've had way too much regulation. I mean, you can go from Obamacare to Dodd-Frank to Sarbanes-Oxley to a lot of these subsidies
Here.
that are going on out there.
Yeah,
And, you know, where we've gone out in the campaign, and we're constantly talking to small business owners, medium business owners, even large business owners, but the biggest complaint they have is that in order to comply with Obamacare, now they're going to have to spend a lot more money that they were initially told they were going to, which makes it less money for them to actually go out and hire people and invest back in their business, to grow their business so they can actually hire more people. And also, more importantly, even like on a Dodd-Frank where they go into banks, because in order for a small business to grow, it needs capital to fund itself, to fund its growth, and for it to grow, that's how you get to hire more people. You want these businesses to grow. But when they go in there and actually have to deal with more compliance officers than loan officers, something's wrong. And when they're having to deal with stacks of paper this high before they even get to a loan officer, and all they're in there is really just trying to get a loan that they've had before, trying to extend their loan so they can continue to grow and hire more people. But all the regulation that's coming through these, and that's what happens when you have people that don't have the real business experience going down to DC. You have people that are operating in a vacuum, not knowing what the effects of their well-intentioned, supposedly, legislation is on Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, and to making sure we don't have another, financial meltdown. I think we have to have some regulation, but what happens is you have too many people down there that don't know what the effect of a lot of these policies are, and then you see the effect because companies are restrained.
So the Obamacare, the short form to apply is 21 pages. Apparently the long form, I believe, is 61 pages.
Yeah, that's.
Who in their right mind thinks that this is the way things should work?
I think the only kind of person that would think that that would work is someone who has never been in the private sector or has been in the private sector so long ago that they forgot what the private sector is. And that just gets to the point of when you have people that have been in politics for their career, while they may be well-intentioned, they just have no perspective on how the real world works. And when you're dealing with 60 pages of forms or regulations that you have to read through, it's beyond ridiculous. And even on the tax reform, even on taxes, I would be for an absolute comprehensive tax reform where you get a lot of the corporate loopholes and personal loopholes out of the way and lower the personal rates and the corporate rates, flatten it down, and you have a revenue neutral overhaul of the tax code. But people don't, 2 days, a week ago was tax day. And you shouldn't have to spend weeks and weeks, no matter who you are, no matter how simple or complicated your taxes are, to have to file your taxes.
Absolutely true. One of the other major issues now, and it's coming to vote very, very quickly as well, and this has big impact on our financial stability as a country, which is immigration. Tell us your thoughts on immigration, please.
Sure. I have a pretty unique perspective on immigration. My parents came here a year before I was born. I learned Spanish first. I grew up in a migrant valley, heavily agriculture, so a lot of the workers there were immigrants. And I'm heartened now that we've got a bipartisan discussion that's raised to a national level. I think the first thing, and I'm with Marco Rubio on this, in terms of you can't do anything unless you secure the border. Unless you secure the border, it's kind of irrelevant what happens north of the border. It's just, because otherwise you're just going to exacerbate the problem if you've got whatever policies you want to put forth north of the border. You need to secure the border, you need to continue building that fence, and you need to start enforcing the laws on that border, so you don't have to have states, take their hands and take matters in their own hands, where they feel like the federal government has let them down or not cover their back.
But when you have somebody who's in charge of Homeland Security, who in her previous assignment was the governor of where? Arizona, which is where so much of this is happening.
You would think that they would have a pretty good perspective on exactly what you need to do on that border.
You would.
I would think. And so on immigration reform, the plan that's been proposed by these 8 bipartisan senators is, it's a tough plan, but it's also a humane plan in terms of having some kind of pathway to citizenship. Now, it's not an easy plan also, but it's also not an impossible path. And there are certain things that these illegal, there's 12 million undocumented workers in this country. So it's not just a moral issue, it's an economic issue. And obviously the first thing that they need to do is they need to pass a criminal background check. If you don't pass a criminal background check, you're sent back to where you came from. I think you also need to have to learn English. I think you need to integrate in American society. I think you need to embrace the idea of America and pledge allegiance. I also think, and I served with some great men and women that weren't citizens. And I think that if you serve the military with honor, that should be part of the pathway to citizenship.
Well, that's already the case.
The case right now.
Right.
So there's definitely steps that have been outlined by these 8 bipartisan senators, led by Marco Rubio on the Republican side, that I would agree with. And it's not an easy path. It's, you don't cut in line, you don't get any special privileges. You go to the back, and because being a citizen, it is the most privileged right that we have as U.S. citizens. Being born here and being a United States citizen and being able to say on your passport that you're a U.S. citizen.
Amen.
So
that is as good as it gets.
So there's another side to this. A lot of the discussion tends to look at the border, but something like, depending on who you want to believe the estimates, 40% of the folks that remain in this country without having a legal right to be here are visa overstayers.
Right.
And I hear the politicos saying, well, geez, we don't know how to keep track of them. Well, I travel internationally fairly regularly for business, and when the countries I go to require a visa, and they keep track of me, and if I'm there for 30 days, I have to leave, or they'll come find me. If they can do it, we ought to be able to do it.
Absolutely, and from what I've seen, that the bipartisan of 8 senators, this group of bipartisan senators, that is actually one of the points that they make in their proposal. We need to start tracking these visas when they enter and exit the United States. We also need to figure out a way to actually increase the number of visas that we have for highly qualified and skilled workers. Because Massachusetts, phenomenal state, best state in the country, where our #1 export is medical devices. But I would argue, since we have the best universities in the country here, our #1 export is educating a lot of foreign nationals and then just letting them leave because we don't give them visas, they can't stay.
Crazy.
The amount of capital and intellectual capital and the amount of training and education these men and women have, and then they go to another country effectively to compete against us after we've trained them and educated them.
Well, and you can buy a green card for $500,000, right?
Yeah,
Literally, no, you can.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
that's the law. So if you look at the present value of a highly educated individual, if that's not worth $500,000, I'd be surprised.
I'd be shocked if it's not the present value worth more. And I know that in this plan that I've seen, that I've reviewed, that it's going to be more of a merit based on getting these green cards and getting a legal status. So,
As a segue with the whole immigration issue, a great percentage of the immigrants speak Spanish. More and more Spanish-speaking people are becoming key elective officials in our country. Ted Cruz being one, and obviously Marco Rubio. It would be wonderful if a certain Gabriel Gomez could join that group. How do you reach out to the Hispanic-speaking community to relate to where you're coming from?
it's, the RNC came out a couple of weeks ago with a 100-page PowerPoint presentation on kind of lessons learned from the 2012 election and even from the election before that, and what we should do going forward. I don't need a 100-page PowerPoint presentation from the RNC to let me know what I should be doing in my campaign. What I've been doing from day one in our campaign is literally trying to expand the party, talk about what we stand for, but more importantly, going into the urban areas, or areas that are typically not Republican strongholds, and talking about the core Republican principles, which are more personal responsibility, more personal freedom, and smaller, more effective government. And it's amazing that when you go into these communities, and I'm fortunate because a lot of these communities I go into, all just speak Spanish. For instance, when the press is following me around, my first interview is with Univision or Telemundo. I'll speak Spanish. But what's amazing is that when I talk about, given my background, because I've got credibility, just like them. I'm a first generation, like a lot of them are. I learned Spanish first. I've worked hard, was given nothing in my life. I earned everything. But when I talk to them about the core Republican principles, they sit there and they go, wow, that's exactly what I believe in. I go, well, you know what? You're a Republican.
Guess what? Yeah.
Guess what? You're a Republican. Yeah. And we're having a big effect in a lot of these areas, which is why I'm so excited about our campaign, because it is a kind of, I'm not saying it's a new kind of Republican, but it's a campaign where we are literally expanding the party because we're taking the core Republican message out there into areas where they just haven't had people go in there and talk to them, and they realized, like, wow, that's exactly what I think, because these are all hardworking. They don't want any handouts. They're very proud of who they are. They're here because it's better than where they came from, and they want a better life for not themselves, but also mostly for their kids.
Which is
And
really
they-
the American
is the
profile
American
of every group
profile.
that
It's the
came
American
across.
profile of
Sure.
every immigrant, whether you're Latino, Polish, whatever,
Yeah.
Russian, anything, Jewish, whatever. It's just any immigrant can relate to that. It doesn't matter what specific group of immigrant. It's just they all realize, like, that's exactly. So the Republican Party, I believe, has an amazing opportunity to capture and bring into the tent a lot of these first and second generation immigrants, in my view.
I remember Suzanne Martinez's speech at the Republican convention where she said something to the effect, gee, my husband and I had been to a meeting, and when we got all done, we looked at each other and said, oh my God, we're Republicans.
It's exactly what happens when we go into a lot of these areas, and people realize, like, wait a second, I'm a Republican, actually. I go, well, you go register as an independent Republican.
There's a great point that you brought up, and just to embellish it for 10 seconds. Folks, if you're watching this really towards the tail end of the month of April. April 30th is the primary date, okay? If you're registered as a Republican, you have to vote only for the Republican. If you're registered as a Democrat, the same thing. If you're registered as an independent, and there's more of you than there are of the other two put together, okay, you can pull a ballot either way for the Republican or the Democrat and cast your ballot. Don't sit there not getting involved. There are some phenomenal candidates. We've had 3 of them, and obviously Mr. Gomez is head and shoulders, as you can see. Other than sitting there, you have to do something to make it happen for him, okay? And perhaps you'd like to share with the folks that are watching what they should be doing.
Sure. My closing statement is, I'm one of you. I've had a lot of great opportunities in my life, but I've worked and I've earned everything I've done in my life, from going to the Naval Academy for a kid who didn't learn English until he went to school, to going to the Academy, to earning his pilot wings of gold, to earning his Navy SEAL Trident, to going to Harvard Business School and having a successful private sector career. I just want to make sure that not only my kids, but your kids have a chance at the American dream. And if we continue to send career politicians down to D.C., you're going to get the same of what we have right now, and that is gridlock, dysfunction, and failure. So what I promise to you is that I will come to this job with a military man's discipline, a father's sensitivity, a businessman's experience. This election is about the future and not the past. I hope to meet all of you out there. I hope to earn your respect, and I hope to earn your vote on April 30th, and I appreciate your time.
Gabriel, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
That sums
Great
it up
night.
beautifully.